This topic is on the Internet of Things resolution that is the November Public Forum topic. The resolution reads, resolved, on balance, the benefit of the Internet of Things outweigh the harms of decreased personal privacy. What I'm going to talk about today is the meaning behind the resolution, both in terms of some of the specific ideas and what it means to weigh one against the other. I'll explore arguments on both sides of the pro and the con, and then I will talk a lot about weighing because that's really what this resolution is about. But let's start by looking at two key concepts, really even three key concepts of the resolution. The first being the Internet of Things. If you ask people what the Internet of Things is about, what the November topic area is, they'll say it's about the Internet of Things. Well, what are the Internet of Things? The Internet of Things is the things that are connected to the Internet, which we see a growing number of devices being connected to the Internet. First it was computers, then it was smartphones. Now we see that your home thermostat can be connected to the Internet, and when it knows you're coming home because of activity on your phone, it will turn on. There are now apps in cities where there are sensors that show parking spaces that are open and then can direct your car right to those parking spaces. In the future generations of the Internet, we're already seeing a bit of driverless cars. Maybe those driverless cars would just drive right into the parking space. The car would know that there's an available parking space and then just go right there. So not only would you now no longer have to look for a parking space, you wouldn't even have to look on your app to find the available parking space. All that your car would just know the parking space is available and direct you right to it. So that is the Internet of Things. It's a connection of all these devices. The second thing, though, is that the topic weighs the Internet of Things against privacy. And a lot of people, when I'll talk about this more in a bit, a lot of people, when they ask what the topic is, you'll say it's the Internet of Things. But the topic compares two things. It asks you to which one on balance outweighs the Internet of Things or privacy. So you also need to look and understand what privacy is. There's some evidence that says that privacy rights is the sphere of individual authority along the existence in the field of action does not upon the individual of others. It is the identity, integrity, intimacy, autonomy, knowledge, communication. And then the other evidence goes on to say that it includes information. So it's what, privacy is what you want to be private, in the sense, not to define a word with a word, but it's about your individual autonomy, your intimacy, your integrity, your identity, who you are, and your ability to control that. And in this context, particularly about information, as we could see, the Internet of Things is going to collect a lot of information that it's going to use in order to work, as we kind of saw through in our last examples. And again, the topic is asking you to compare the two. I want to make a few essential points about this topic. Again, the topic is both about the Internet of Things and privacy. You have to, in order to prepare for your debates, you have to research and understand both of these concepts. If you spend all of your time simply researching the Internet of Things and you don't really understand privacy and how to weigh that against the Internet of Things, you're probably going to lose a lot of debates, because most of the arguments are about in favor of, most of the literature that's written about the Internet of Things is kind of somewhat in favor of it, talking about just all the benefits that it has. Sure, there are some downsides, one of which is privacy, but if you just kind of focus on the literature about the Internet of Things, it's only going to casually kind of mention, hey, this invades your privacy. You need to go into the privacy literature and really read about why privacy is good and why it may be more valuable than concepts such as the Internet of Things. Second of all, I want to kind of point out that this topic isn't stupid. When this topic first came out, even I kind of reacted a little bit negatively to the wording, what the Internet of Things. It sounds kind of silly. A lot of coaches were kind of bashing the topic online, but the Internet of Things is a very, it's like an important concept, that it's an important idea. There's probably tens of thousands of articles written on the Internet of Things. There's scholarly research on the Internet of Things. There are policy position papers on the Internet of Things. Companies are publishing papers on the Internet of Things. It does exist now. Sure, it's something that's going to exist more in the future, but a lot of evidence says we already have 3 billion devices connected to the Internet. And by 2020, we're going to have 20 to 50 billion devices connected to the Internet. So the Internet is something here now. It is going to grow into the future, but it is a real concept, and it does exist. The third thing I want to point out is that it's not impossible to be calm. There was originally, and I think there still is amongst a lot of people, a lot of concern about the con that, hey, there's just so many different benefits to the internet, and that the pro's going to be able to argue, and the con's just kind of stuck defending privacy, which is just kind of one argument and kind of more of an amorphous concept. But a lot of the specific scenarios just really aren't very good. You can put the scenarios into categories and prepare to kind of answer them defensively. Privacy has an impact. You can't articulate the impact of privacy and develop that, and I will talk about how you can use that privacy impact to turn the case, which is very important. Then, of course, we have substantial problems with the Internet of Things and cybersecurity. Now, it's questionable, of course, whether or not the con can directly argue for cybersecurity, since the resolution pushes them in the direction of privacy, but at the very least, all those cybersecurity arguments offset the value of the benefits of the internet. And I'll talk more how to kind of directly relate those and pull those into the topic, but I think that it's a useful argument. Also, look, it's going to come down to kind of this topic is very important to understand. It's going to come down to who weighs the issue. You have to weigh one thing versus another. You don't want to just say, okay, in your speeches, here are all the benefits of the Internet of Things, when you give your pro-constructive, and then when you're con, just say, hey, there's this privacy argument, and privacy is important. It's going to come down to who weighs those out, and you want to start weighing those out in the constructive. But now let's just turn so you have a reasonable understanding of the topic. If you haven't started your reading yet, or even if you have some of the different pro-arguments that you could advance in the debate, different reasons why the Internet of Things is good. These are arguments that you can use kind of to pick from when you're pro, or that and that you need to be prepared to answer when you are con. So let's look at the pro arguments. One of the strong pro arguments is the economy. There are a number of reasons the Internet of Things can boost the economy. It can boost overall sales. It can boost the overall sector, just the networking sectors within it. It could boost banking. Now we have mobile apps, and we have more apps that can make intelligent assistance about investment decisions. It can help the airline industry kind of meet the preferences of its customers on planes. It can help them direct pricing to what people are willing to pay to particular flights. There's a lot of evidence that says all this interconnection is going to help make supply chains, for the delivery of products much more efficient. It will save industry a lot of money. Maybe they can reduce the number of workers that they have. They can reduce waste and inefficiency in the supply chain. That it can increase that it can help a lot with manufacturing, the assembly of parts. And of course, we see the development of cloud computing, which is simply really kind of the storage of information, not on your local computer, but what you would call in the cloud. Dropbox is an example of the cloud. Many people use that for debate. And obviously the need for the cloud will expand. Cloud computing will expand dramatically under the Internet of Things. We can see enhancements of security, such as kind of more monitoring, surveillance, and the collection of information related to trends, such as that can be used to fight counterterrorism and can be used to fight crime. Since one of the objections on the con, is almost likely to be cybersecurity, even if they're just using it as a defensive argument, establishing these security arguments out of the gate on the pro can be strategically useful for the pro. You can see that there are many environmental benefits. There are benefits related to climate change. For example, it could improve energy efficiency. It makes what's called the smart grid possible, which is kind of a connection of renewable energy and alternative energy sources to a grid. Most importantly, so you can balance demand for power. So, you can get access to solar power when the sun is shining. You can store it. You can deliver the power where it's needed, when there is peak demand. It's called the smart grid, and you'll see a lot of literature written about that. There's a lot of evidence about water conservation and how the Internet of Things can help us use water more efficiently, that it can monitor and prevent things such as forest fires. So there's kind of a whole slew of benefits that I would put into the category of the environment. There's evidence about education, how we can more efficiently track students, both within schools, out of schools, how we can monitor instantly kind of their activity and how they're doing in school, and then adapt the instruction to individual needs somewhat automatically. If you can insert artificial intelligence in there, it could make automatic adjustments. For public safety, we have issues with police and fire response. In Boston, for example, there's these detectors that detect shootings and gunfire. So when there's gunfire, then in an area they get kind of a a notification that there's gunfire in an area, and then police can automatically respond. Somebody doesn't have to report it first, or you don't have to be in a situation where the police just happen to hear it. The same thing is kind of true for disaster responses. When you have a when you have a disaster that occurs, there's monitoring already happens. You know where some of the worst environmental effects of the disaster occurred. You know where certain like houses got knocked down or windows got blown out, and you can have an effective disaster response. Of course, all of these make what's possible called a smart city. You can have efficient transportation, which I mentioned earlier, like the automatic kind of parking spot availability and the cars knowing that they need to go there and park. You can have roads where congestion is signaled, and then a particular area, and cars could be automatically redirected towards other areas. Those are a couple examples. We already talked about public safety. We talked about improving the environment, improving education, improving security. You can combine all these, and what you have is really development of a smart city, which is important because you have over the next 10, 20 years, you have millions and millions of more people now choosing to live into cities. So when these cities function well, when there's strong public safety, when there's more efficiency, that can obviously be valuable. In Korea, we see a lot of smart cities, a smart city outside of Seoul being developed, and the application of a lot of smart city technologies really into Seoul and into other cities. There are, of course, other benefits in health. There's a lot of talk about how the Internet of Things can be used to improve health. And obviously, a lot of people use these devices like smart bed or keep track of their steps and their miles on the phone. There's social apps where you can challenge other people to run as much as you and to kind of keep you running. We have emergency response. Maybe in your home, there's something that notifies the emergency medical, that there's a fire in your home, and instead of your smoke detector goes off and you have to kind of run outside and then you call the fire department. Maybe when your smoke detector goes off, the fire department is already notified. And then, if you fall down the stairs, then the hospitals are notified and the ambulance comes out. So, and there's a lot of just kind of applications of health and doctors keeping track of information that you can read about. This is a major area of pro arguments. The home I touched on briefly, but there's a lot of different appliances that can be automatically activated, like when you're on the way home from work. These could help in particular. For some people, these will just be a matter of convenience, but for others, such as the disabled and the elderly, these could make a big difference just in their life. In terms of democracy, the Internet of Things makes it easier to connect with other people, which could increase political activism. Also, kind of increase government accountability. We have kind of more transparency, more information going around. You can see that one of the devices, that that isn't a thing on the internet is a police body camera. We've previously had public forum topics about that. This introduces a lot of interesting issues of race. In particular, we've seen a big discussion of body cameras. As I said, this was a previous public forum topic, and for those of you who are interested in debating about issues of race, at least on the pro, you may want to take advantage of this body cameras argument. Of course, the topic is not limited to the United States or the first world. We can see that this could really dramatically help global development, where you see global integration and sustainable development. There's also the questions of kind of singularity, which we'll kind of explore in the future. The idea that kind of people start to integrate the machine and the human no longer kind of become separate, and we have integration. We have a singularity in the development of artificial intelligence. I only kind of cover that with a couple link cards in the release, but I will have more information available on that soon. So these are just kind of some of the highlights of the pro arguments, different ideas that you can choose from on the pro, and that, on the con, of course, you obviously need to be ready to debate. You may find some other kind of interesting applications yourself, but you'll probably find that at least most of them fit into one of these areas. So what are the keys to winning on the pro? I think there are three key things. One, you want to generally argue that the Internet of Things is good. Then you want to pick an area or a scenario. For example, the environment, forest fires, climate change, maybe the economy, though that may be more general, but then you might choose a specific aspect of the economy. Then I think you want to preempt the privacy argument, particularly if you're the first speaker in the debate. You want to really kind of have some answers, some preempts to the privacy argument, some different values that get at the privacy argument. I'll talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. In terms of the internet being generally good, you might want to make general arguments in favor of the economy. There's great evidence that says it will trigger trillions of dollars in economic activity and growth. You could talk about the importance of advancement in technology. You might have a framework. I've seen these floating around that just says, hey, economic growth is good. We should do everything we can to promote the economy. The Internet of Things is one of those. Other people say, hey, technological advancement is great. We should do everything that we can to promote technology. Now, beyond those kind of general arguments, I think, like I said, you want to have an area of consideration, such as the environment, maybe climate change in particular, or education. How are you going to choose those? I think you should choose those based on something that interests you, right? Something you care about, something you want to read about. It's easy to find the link cards that connect the Internet of Things to these specific areas. So that really won't be the issue, but you want to pick one that interests you. Second of all, you want to impact it. Okay, we see kind of sometimes in public forum a lack of impact to arguments. I don't think you want to exaggerate it because the public forum judges can be put off by that. So you don't necessarily want to say climate change causes all of human extinction, because some judges will just say, oh, that seems kind of silly. But you can talk about how climate change reduces crop production, causes species extinction, maybe the undermining of the coral reefs, increases storms. You need to have an impact to your argument. You want to have an impact to your argument on the pro, because that's the one thing you can have on the pro that's easier to have on the pro and the con, is a large consequentialist impact. You want to be prepared to thoroughly defend it. If you're going to choose climate change, there's a lot of things you need to prepare to defend. The science of climate change, the modeling, the impacts. You need to be able to answer things like carbon dioxide is good for crops, that SO2 actually kind of offsets or reduces warming. I'm going to answer that warming is good because it prevents an ice age. So within any kind of sector, that's an example of kind of a sector. There's a lot of different things you need to defend, but within any sector, there are many things. I think you also want to kind of argue for a utilitarian calculation, which I'll emphasize again and again. The overall greatest good for the greatest number, because that's the type of benefit you're going to have. And then, maybe try to find a unique area. Try to find something that people aren't that prepared for. I did hit a lot of the main ones in the beginning part of the lecture, but there are certainly others that you could choose from. Again, then finally, you want to preempt privacy. We'll cover that next. You could obviously kind of wait and put some of these arguments in your rebuttal, but look, the resolution says on balance outweigh. All right, you don't want to just talk about the benefits of the Internet of Things in the first speech. I don't really even think you've established at any point, even in your speech, why that outweighs. All right, and if you wait to try to do that into your rebuttal, into your summary, you're going to get way behind in the debate. So I think on the pro, you want to attack the privacy kind of idea and concept head on, or at least explain why it outweighs. What are some different arguments you can make against privacy? Now, some of these you might want to save for your rebuttal. Some of these might make more sense in a constructive, where you're talking about weighing and those types of things. But the first one, and I think one of the best ones, especially to put in your constructive, is that there are values other than privacy, such as innovation, economic growth, entrepreneurialism, saving money, saving resources, right? We have many values that are kind of not just consequentialist based that you can talk about. And, to have some of those in your speech and at least set up why they're more important than privacy, or as valuable as privacy, I think is very, very important. There's some evidence on this in the update of the release I did in the answers to privacy. We can actually find a lot of these arguments. Second, you can say that recording, which is kind of part of surveillance, is an important part of free speech, and that's all right. We just don't have rights to privacy. You can argue that the commercial collection of information is not really about rights. Rights are things that you have against government action. Okay, if you agree to let a company collect information about you, that's not really about your rights. You want to point out that the Internet of Things really improves the quality of life, and that's worth the trade-off that we have with privacy. And there's a lot of good evidence that make that argument. You want to find fifth is that many well-functioning societies have different structures. Communal societies, for example, didn't or don't care about privacy. Privacy is not just some inherently desirable thing that is important to every human, and it has been important to every human society. You can criticize its value. You can point out that by enabling activism and policing the government through things like body cameras and just general availability of information, that we're going to be able to protect rights. and that we're going to strengthen democracy, which is kind of some of the, kind of terminal-esque impacts that they'll read to privacy. You can argue particularly that body cameras can reduce police brutality. You should also point out that we could regulate or minimize any of the reductions of privacy that occur through established laws. And finally, I think you want to make an argument about utilitarianism. The utilitarianism is the greatest value, it's the greatest good for the greatest number. So those are some different answers to privacy and different approaches that you should incorporate right into the pro speech. And I, again, want to emphasize that's why you really need to be prepared to debate just not the Internet of Things, but privacy. On the con, of course, you want to defend it as a very important value, and do that well. But on the pro, you need to be able to answer it, and all the answers you find to that are not just going to be in the Internet of Things literature. Now, the other major objection on the con, as I pointed out, is cyber security, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. But for now, let's just talk about how to answer that argument. The first is you want to argue that it isn't relevant, that the only thing that the negative gets to defend that outweighs the benefits of the Internet of Things is privacy. Now, I think there are some problems with that argument, but on the first glance, I think that's a way you can read the resolution, and in many debates, I think you'll be able to win with that argument. Second, you want to argue that the impacts, especially the large impacts, are empirically denied. We just had a big attack on the Internet on October 21st, and yes, it caused some people some inconvenience. Some websites went down for a while, but we're all still here. There's no catastrophic impact. Not a single person died from it. Third, you want to argue there's no going back on the existing Internet and the existing Internet of Things. So it's best if we kind of continue to improve them with more technological growth. You can also argue that the government can step in to prevent widespread impacts. It does provide assistance to security firms, and they work together to stop these types of attacks. We saw that happen the other day. You can argue that security is improving every day on the Internet just generally. So even though there are cyber threats, that also corresponds with an increase in cybersecurity. You should argue that economic self-deterrence means there will not be any major attacks. At most, you're going to see kind of some third-party, like outside terrorist group types of attacks. You're not going to see another country like China or Russia really just try to shut down our entire economy, because that, our economies are interdependent, intertwined. That would shut down their economy as well. You can argue that, some people say, well, if there's big cybersecurity attacks, the U.S. will blame it on the Russians and, we'll end up in a war. But this is empirically denied. We haven't engaged in wars over cyber attacks. We have traced cyber attacks back to Russia and China, and we never kind of really engaged in any military aggression. Any type of retaliation is usually within the same sphere, so we might do a counter cyber attack. It doesn't escalate. There's been no escalation with weapons. Nobody's died from any of these things. And we have the motive now. Obviously, some people say the Russians have been involved, in the WikiLeaks disclosure that they hacked the DNC. There's more and more evidence that points some of these attacks back to the Russians, but we haven't engaged in any wars. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, but I want to emphasize here at the end, I think you want to, and we could use definitely some better cards on this, both in the release. That's something I'm going to continue to look for. That just says, as the Internet of Things develops, that cybersecurity will improve. I think this could be a very interesting pro argument. When you talk about just, in choosing one of the areas that I mentioned earlier, interests you definitely is one thing, prepared to defend, but also you want to have something that's strategically valuable. If you know that the con's going to come at you with privacy, and there's a very good chance they're going to come at you with cybersecurity, at least to minimize kind of the benefits that you can claim from it. So why not have a big cybersecurity contention, right? Why not say, hey, if we continue to develop the Internet of Things, it's already here now. We already have 3 billion connected devices. There's no going back. If we continue to develop that, that means we're also going to make cybersecurity improvements in those areas. And cybersecurity improvements in those areas, are also going to benefit, cybersecurity protections in other aspects of the Internet, not just the Internet of Things, but in all types of different connections and the way this technology is utilized. And third, you can make an argument, such as those that I made earlier, that, hey, if we have more surveillance, that means it's going to be easier to get at and arrest criminals or terrorists or whatever, right, you want to call the people who are threatening to take down the Internet. That it's just going to be better. There's going to be more policing. There's going to be more intelligence gathering, and that's all going to be effective. And if we can be more effective at conducting surveillance and more effective at creating security generally, then we get kind of what essentially is the root cause, right, of the attacks. If we can get the people before they use the Internet of Things to create the cyber attacks, then we've solved the problem at the core. So this is a very, I think, a strategic argument for the pro to make, and it's something that the con needs to be very prepared. Now, of course, the con's going to have their cybersecurity arguments and use those as turns against the pro, but I think it's something that I think you want to think about making on the pro. The cyber, a cybersecurity, general security argument to preempt, again, the cons arguments and to also have your own offense. Now, let's look at the con arguments. I've already kind of talked about them kind of in terms of answering them. So we know that privacy is the big con argument. That's in the resolution. There are enormous links, and I'll talk about those in a minute, meaning there's just great evidence that says the Internet of Things just kind of will completely wipe out privacy. You just need to win the impact, which is kind of a little more difficult, but we'll talk about some of those ways. I also just want to point out here that a lot of people are debating this as kind of the Internet of Things threatens privacy, invades privacy. That's true. But look, the resolution is not, one of the weaknesses of the way the resolution is worded is it really just asks you, like, what's more important, privacy or the Internet of Things? Which outweighs? It doesn't say, do the benefits of the Internet of Things outweigh the privacy harms caused by the Internet of Things? It literally just pits privacy against the Internet of Things. We saw this problem kind of happen on other topics. Now, I do think most people are just going to debate whether or not the Internet of Things, kind of links into privacy and comparing those two, rather than the general question of privacy versus the Internet of Things. But usually something you should kind of be aware of as you go into your debates. The second thing, of course, is cybersecurity. And the con will need to establish its relevance. They'll talk about the impact, which is bigger and easier. And again, it'll have a lot of salience for judges because this October 21st impact was arguably responsible. The responsibility of lies, a lot of this with the Internet of Things, because what this was is a denial of service attack. When those occur, what happens is that tons of requests for information are made to particular websites, so many that the websites get overwhelmed. Even big websites, such as like PayPal, which are ready for lots of data requests simultaneously, but the hackers were able to install malware and Internet of Things devices and trigger a massive number of requests. There's a card in the release that I added from the Boston Globe in the update. It says, that was written on October 22nd, it says, could millions of connected devices, thermostats, and kids' toys bring the Internet to its knees? It's beginning to look that way. On Friday, epic cyber attacks crippled a major Internet firm. They said the organized networks of connected devices tried to create a massive botnet that threw a monstrous 1.2 trillion bits of data every second at DIN servers. While DDoS attacks have been used for years, they've become very popular in recent months, thanks to the proliferation of Internet of Things devices, ranging from connected thermostats to security cameras and smart TVs. Okay, so there's just kind of a lot of evidence that's going to be written even right before you start debating this topic, whether it's this coming weekend or the weekend after or even after that, that just kind of really ties these disruptions to the Internet of Things. It's going to have a lot of salience for the judges. But let's talk first about the privacy argument. The link to the privacy argument is huge. It's bigly. Okay, how so? Well, look, data is being collected on all of your movements. All right, like think about it, right? If you use a step recorder program in your phone or any type of smart device, it literally can tell like how many steps you take, and like a lot of times everywhere you go. Google Maps, so it has a great history. If you're using that, right, you have to have your notification, your location services enabled, or Google Maps won't work. Google literally knows everywhere you go in the world and how much time you spend in different places. So does Pokemon, right? They know everywhere. They know everywhere that you go, everywhere that you've been. But not just data on this, but all the interactions that you have kind of, and it combines the data to create a profile of you, and then those intersects those profiles with people around you. Now, the government can then purchase this data if they want. That's what's happening with a lot of their surveillance. They're just buying the data the same way that private companies kind of can buy data from one another. And they can otherwise gain access to the data through what they'll claim is legitimate means. They'll make kind of arrangements with companies. They'll say they have warrants or they don't, and I don't have time to go into all that in detail, but last year there's a whole high school policy debate topic about this question, and you can see all the different ways the government can gain access to the information collected by private companies. It's way more information that's collected just by your time, what I would say traditionally online, such as internet browsing, right? It's collecting information from all these devices. People don't understand really how omnipresent this collection of data is, and they can't easily opt out of it, right? If you buy your cool new smart refrigerator, you're not going to be able to use your smart refrigerator. So, and it's not like it has a simple opt-out thing that you have online, and you can't opt out of other people's use. Like if people have a driverless car, it needs to have sensors in it, it needs to have surveillance cameras in it to make the car function. You're gonna, even if you don't own a car and you're just walking down the street, okay, or you're in somebody else's car, all that can be picked up on. There's good evidence that basically says this is the end of privacy. Like we are done with privacy as a result of the Internet of Things. So the question, I don't really see, that the pro kind of reading evidence that says, oh, this is not a significant invasion of privacy, so don't really worry about it. I haven't seen a single piece of evidence. I've read hundreds of articles that it even makes that argument or comes close to making that argument. Sometimes in public forum, people just kind of say, oh, I have a car, this is this. And you look at the evidence, it barely says anything about it. If somebody kind of in the debate says, oh, the Jones evidence says the Internet of Things isn't a significant privacy invasion, you should definitely ask them to see this card because they don't have that. Now, so then it's really just a question of the impact. It's really about personhood. You want to argue that privacy, it's kind of what makes us human. It's who we are. It's important to our self-expression. That we're not going to express ourselves, at least in controversial ways many a times, unless we can be privacy. And it's not just something, you see this argument, well, if you don't have anything to hide, then maybe then you shouldn't be worried about your privacy. Well, I may not be a criminal, but maybe I'm gay, or maybe I do something that other people in my community would look down upon, right? So that's not a criminal thing, right? But it's something that you just kind of want to keep to yourself. You can also argue that it's a right-based claim, that it's a morality claim. But you really kind of need to strongly develop kind of the impact of privacy, and most importantly, you need to be able to articulate it well in the debate, right? And part, of course, debate is persuading people and articulating things, and sometimes you can just kind of say something and it's obvious the judges know what you're talking about or agree with you on, but you need to really kind of articulate and develop this impact of privacy. And I also think you want to kind of make a couple other arguments that you can use to turn back pro arguments. There's a whole law review article. Some of the evidence is cited in the release, and there's a link to it online in the essays that just says that privacy is critical to technological innovation because people want to be able to express themselves, their initials, ideas in private, or we're not going to have innovation. And the article actually says that this is important to innovation just in all different ways, whereas big data, right, the Internet of Things is really just one instantiation of innovation. And if we want to have broad-based undergirding innovation, then what we have to do is have privacy. So I think that can be used to turn back a lot of the case. It certainly turns back arguments about how you have to prioritize innovation, particularly those that are expressed as like framework type arguments. You can also want to argue that a loss of privacy undermines internet security, which, as I'll talk about in a second, is to make the cybersecurity argument relevant. But that's privacy, and you really kind of course, want to develop it on the negative. They say you probably don't really want to spend a whole lot of time developing the link because, A, as I just mentioned, it might not even be relevant. You're just asking to compare privacy to the benefit of the Internet of Things, not whether they're connected. But even if you kind of want to make the connection, it's pretty easy to make the connection. The link evidence on it is very, very strong, and I don't really see the negative challenging it. So you certainly don't want to spend a lot of time in your speeches just kind of making an argument about how the Internet of Things undermines privacy. More than probably 10 or 15 seconds on that's going to be a waste of your time. What you really want to do is develop the impact and then explain how the impact turns the case. Now let's get into Internet security, commonly referred to as cybersecurity. Again, as I kind of mentioned, you want to establish the links to this. You want to connect it to the topic and establish its relevance. First of all, you can point out that the loss of privacy undermines Internet security. you can't protect your privacy, then it makes it easier for cyber criminals to access your privacy. Like they can learn stuff about you, maybe to defeat your passwords. Like they can figure out what your mother's maiden name is, or they can figure out what city you were born in, right? And then they can take that information because of because your privacy isn't very well protected on the internet, figure out who you are, and then use that information, learn stuff about you, okay, and then go out and use that to establish profiles, in the banking sector and other ways, and steal your identity, use that identity to commit a terrorist attack, use that identity to engage in other types of aggression, criminal behavior. So in that way, what you're really just saying is that cybersecurity is an impact to privacy, and that's how you're connecting it to the topic, right? We certainly, when debating the question of which one is more important, we would consider any impact to privacy, including cybersecurity. Second of all, you want to say that a lack of security is what causes the privacy violations, right? If the internet is insecure, that is a reason that privacy violations happen. And if you're going to make arguments about why the Internet of Things undermines privacy, then cybersecurity's relevance gets pushed in there. So that's the second way that it's relevant. Third, you can make an argument of like, look, we're trying to compare the overall on-balance benefit of the Internet of Things to privacy. And if one of the reasons that the Internet of Things is bad is because it hurts cybersecurity, then when you're figuring out like the calculation, what is the overall net benefit of the Internet of Things, if it has a lot of cybersecurity problems, you weigh that in that way. And then if you determine that the Internet of Things is a net negative, then clearly privacy outweighs that. So that's the third way that you can establish the relevance of the cybersecurity argument for the judge considering it in his or her calculation. But even if you can't do that directly through one of those three ways, you want to kind of point out that, look, in all these sectors, that cybersecurity is a general problem with the Internet of Things. And when you look at particular sectors like home, water conservation, there's evidence. We have evidence in the release for all those different sectors that say those sectors, what they do is they expose they create cybersecurity problems and they undermine the effectiveness of the Internet in those sectors. So if you have a general cybersecurity argument, every time the pro brings up a general sector, in addition to debating the general value of the Internet of Things in that particular sector area, you can say that creates cybersecurity problems. And you already have impacts or arguments about the problem of cybersecurity generally. So I think it's kind of very useful argument to make on the con to help just generally kind of defeat the value of the Internet of Things, but it also gives you a larger consequentialist impact as long as you can win its relevance to assessing the importance of the resolution. In terms of the impact, again, they can steal your identity. Once they steal your identity, they can steal your money to commit a terrorist attack. They can get your credentials and shut down the Internet of Things of the power grid. They can take control of like a car or a car and crash it. They could take control of your stove and like start a fire in your home. Those would be smaller things. Or they can infect it with malware and create denial of service attacks across the entire Internet and shut down parts of the Internet or large swaths of the Internet. Imagine thinking we're coming up on the election here. You're going to have terms before then. What if they commit these general denial of service attacks in voting systems that are tied into the Internet, kind of get shut down in the middle of the election day? Imagine what a kind of crisis this could cause, in the United States. And of course, then, we even have other evidence such as in that Boston Globe, and there's a CNN report that says, hey, this could shut down the stock market if you have a even broader scale denial of service attack that lasts for an entire day. There's even evidence that the entire Internet could be shut down. So while the previous impacts have not been that large, other ones could get much bigger. Now, those are the two major kind of offensive con arguments. Now, there are some other offensive con arguments I think that are a little more difficult maybe to establish the relevance of, just because the Internet, because the resolution does pit kind of just privacy against the benefit of the Internet of Things. But, like I said, you can kind of work to establish the relevance of the cybersecurity arguments back to the topic. You can try to do that. With these arguments and just showing that they're undesirable. But there's a lot of evidence about once people get access to this data and more data, they'll use it in racially and economically discriminatory manners. I mentioned the idea of singularity, kind of the melding of the human with machine. There's evidence that's bad. There's evidence the Internet of Things is going to support the development of artificial intelligence, and that's bad. It'll support Bitcoin, which is an alternative money system, and that's bad. So, again, you have to work to establish the relevance of these arguments. I don't think that they're that important. A lot of times these debates, when they just try to pit two different things, all the arguments end up getting considered, either because the judges, you have a lot of lay judges, don't really understand that, maybe the resolution tried to just pit these two different things, or one side doesn't really even make the arguments about the relevance, or because the speeches are short, they don't have a time to really kind of develop what we would essentially have in policy debate as a topicality argument. So a lot of times these other arguments bleed in and get considered by the judges. So you certainly might want to consider them for the negative, but at least on the pro, you want to be prepared to answer these arguments, both in terms of this, you want to challenge the relevance of the arguments, you want to attack the substance of the arguments, but I want to put them out there because you can't just ignore the arguments. Now, talked a lot about winning on the pro, but what about winning on the con? Well, first of all, you want to have some general answers that kind of get at the value of the Internet of Things. You want to answer scenarios, and then you want to win privacy and other offense, such as cybersecurity or what I just talked about on the last slide, and weigh that against the benefit of the Internet. Your con speech needs to say, look, the Internet of Things isn't good, that there are bad things, particular privacy violations that result from the Internet of Things, and weigh those against the pros. So like your pro-constructive speech, your con-constructive speech needs to have and start introducing the weighing element into it. It's an essential component of the resolution, and it's an essential component of your speeches. Now let's look at some general answers. Now these general answers you always want to have available for two reasons. One, you want to just generally kind of challenge the desirability of the Internet of Things, especially if the pro debates it generally. But second of all, you might not have answers to every specific scenario that they're going to read. So you want to have a general frontline set of argument against these answers. First of all, you want to prove that it's kind of not, the effectiveness and the workability of the Internet of Things is far into the future, right? We're just starting to have devices now. We need to get to billions of more devices. And then we need to get these devices connected together, which has not really even started happening yet. Okay, and then they need to kind of all work as one system. So, right, you have to have the parking app, then you have to have, a sensor there collecting kind of the unused parking spaces. Those unused parking spaces have to be connected to a network. Then we have to have the app that connects the unused parking spaces to the person's phone, and then they have to have it on their phone and either choose to use it, or they have to have a driverless car, which we're just kind of seeing the beginning of, and that driverless car has to then be connected to that app, right? So we don't really kind of have a synergy. We're nowhere close to a synergy amongst all these devices, which is what the pros evidence is talking about, but we just kind of keep collecting the data now, and there's a lot of privacy violations now. Second is that there are a lot of problems with these technologies working together. To go back to our parking example, we don't know that the same company is going to own the surveillance system that keeps track of the parking spaces that then, develops the app that connects it, and then you have your car, and is that going to be the same company? All right, people joke about having a Facebook living room, an Amazon bathroom, and who knows what your doctor's office is using, and do all these kind of technologies work together? They're all going to have proprietary materials. 3, we want to kind of make a good point that technologies are not needed. Things may improve, but society's in reasonable shape now. I mean, the economy is like growing. Maybe it could grow a little faster, but it's growing now. Most people have jobs. The unemployment rate is low. It's never going to go to zero because it's not how the economy is structured. Okay, that maybe, it'd be great if, your house kind of automatically notified the fire department if there was a fire, but there's not like an enormous benefit to that. Your house is probably going to, if a big fire, your house is probably going to burn down either way. If it's a small fire, the difference in notification is not going to make that much difference. It might be nice to have a driverless car, but people have been driving for years without any problems. It'd be cool to have your coffee pot just turn on when you wake up in the morning and you don't have to do it, but turning it on is not really that big a thing. A lot of these technologies, a lot of the pro evidence is written by these sources from these companies, and it's very much hyped. Right? Not just kind of in terms of, hey, we have to realize this is going to happen for a long time, but, we function well without these technologies. And then again, as I said, you want to make the cybersecurity argument because you can connect that back into everything else, into all the specific scenarios. Now, back to the specific scenarios. What I suggest, and I made a list of these on a Google Doc, and that Google Doc is linked, okay, on my website, and it lists like all the major pro arguments about the benefits of the internet. All right. And what you want to do is divide these up on your team so you can take like different cards you've cut, different evidence cards you have from Millennial Speech and Debate or other handbook type providers, and divide these up. So if you have, say there's like 20 or 30, say there's 30 different benefits, you have 10 people on your team, have each person take 3 and make sure they have a set of answers, 5 or 6 answers to each of these scenarios. You're not going to have more than that amount of time to read these in your speech. You want to just have it on there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, and go through and have some quick answers to these arguments. I've been kind of generally suggesting this for a couple of years now, but I saw one team is very successful, obviously, Audrey Kell. I judged them in their debate at Wake Forest, and they had paper, they had briefs with just answers written to each of these scenarios that people were reading essentially or on the probable cause topic, benefits to probable cause. They just list them out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then when the team asked them for it in the crossfire, they just said, here's the piece of paper. You can look at our evidence. They didn't try to hide it, act silly like some people in public forum do, where they just try to hide their evidence either because they don't want the other team to have the evidence or because they think because the card doesn't usually say that, which is often the case in most instances. But anyhow, I'm just saying to just have the paper ready, just give it right to the other team, makes the judge happy. They can look at your evidence. You're going to give a better speech because you're just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And look, it works, it wins. This team used paper. They got all the way to the finals of Wake Forest. I don't know if the other Audrey Kell teams use the paper. I just judged that one, but I think it works very well. But even if you don't use paper, divide it up, have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 argument. Second of all, you want to make sure you have some terminal impact arguments, right? Like, have some general evidence that the environment's not collapsing, that it's improving, existing technologies have improved the environment. It's not just about to completely collapse. We're all not about to die. You can make the same arguments about economic growth and technological progress, right? Or just the risks of terrorism or other common impacts that people read in debate. Do the same thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you don't have answers to their specific scenario, then you can answer what their terminal impact is. You want to make some general arguments about how the Internet of Things technology isn't that great. Most importantly, as I say, the scenarios are predictable. You're most likely going to be able I've listed them all out. You can find answers to them in the Millennial Speech and Debate briefs. If you have other briefs, I've seen other answers to some of them in there as well. You can go through and do some additional research and just write answers to them. Then at the tournament, you hear a couple more that you have answers to as your team. Get answers written to those. Apply some of your other arguments from your other scenarios. They probably apply. Use your general kind of overview answers and use some impact defense. It's not people act like when this topic came out, oh my gosh, there's so many different benefits. The con's never going to be ready. Do a little work, not even a ton of work. Do a little work collectively on your team, or if you have a small team, go in with another school and get these answers set up. Now, again, on the con, you want to do some weighing. I suggested how to weigh that out on the pro, how to weigh it out on the con. First of all, time frame. You want to say that privacy violations are happening now. We're starting to see the development of different types of Internet of Things now, and these devices are collecting a lot of information, and this information about you can easily kind of be taken advantage of or be released, whereas we're not going to see the real benefits of the Internet of Things to far into the future with the kind of the cohesive integration of technology, which may happen in the future or may not happen at all. Second of all, you want to argue for scope. People in public forum like to use the word scope. I hear it in almost every debate. It's funny because then everyone talks about scope. But anyhow, you can say everyone's privacy is violated, right? Like generalized surveillance. All Internet of Things devices use surveillance, and some of them, like driverless cars, police body cameras are generally surveilling the general area. This is not something you can opt in or out of, whereas everyone's not going to use the technology or benefit from it. Third, you want to kind of talk about magnitude. Now, you want to be careful if you're going to make a magnitude argument in the con that you are winning the relevance of the cybersecurity argument and its impact or some other impact. Because a lot of times, I think on this topic, in just terms of the magnitude of the impact, the pro may have an advantage there. So you might be more on the con about undercutting magnitude, arguing that scope is more important, impacting. A lot of people argue their magnitude impact is well up into the future, argue their magnitude impact is really kind of probabilistic, whereas your kind of scope impacts are definitive. But you need to deal with the question of magnitude either by saying you have a bigger magnitude or undercutting the relevance of magnitude. You want to argue that privacy arguments turn case, right? I talked about this, how privacy, the protection of privacy is essential to innovation, and use, right? That if people see their privacy violated, they might not use the Internet of Things device. I've seen evidence that makes that argument. It's probably not the most persuasive. I mean, people use Facebook and Gmail even though their privacy is massively being violated. They think they're getting something for free. They want the convenience of it. So people use it. Use is probably not as great of an argument, but this privacy key to innovation argument is pretty cool. You want to argue deontological or morality-based, rights-based impacts to privacy, that those come first, that they're a priori claims. And as mentioned, you want to talk about other values, the economy, innovation, First Amendment expressions, right to record, okay? And maybe just the changing nature of society, that we don't have stagnant societies. Maybe this, measure, over the last 50 or 60, 100 years, you thought privacy is important. But now the Internet of Things is transforming our society in ways that are really beneficial. If it wasn't beneficial, we wouldn't be using the Internet of Things. And yes, maybe we're going to have to give up some privacy, but sometimes when you gain in one area, you lose in another, and that's a trade-off we're kind of willing to make, or should be willing to make as a society. But most important, conceptually, you need to weigh. It says on balance. A lot of debaters forget about important parts of the topic. They just be like, here, I'm just going to list out the benefits of the Internet of Things, or I'm just going to talk about why privacy is good, all right, or I'm going to, and then they don't do the weighing, and they're like, well, I'm just going to lay out these arguments in my constructive speech, and I'll then weigh them in my summary. Okay, well, maybe you can, but remember, your summary and your final focus are only 2 minutes. If you wait till final focus, some of the judges are going to think these arguments are new. If you advance them earlier and teams don't respond, you can point out in the debates that some of the arguments were dropped, okay? And if you don't do this and the other team does, you're probably almost just certainly going to lose the debate. If they introduce the weighing earlier and you never talk about on balance and they stress on balance, you're just going to lose. So this is on balance, okay? Outweighs is a critical part of the topic, okay? And privacy is a critical part of the topic and something you need to think about and research, not just in the literature about the Internet of Things. So thanks for listening if you got that far. Hopefully this will help you win some debates.